Formally welcome you after a few technical glitches to this podcast for CityMusic Cleveland, which Jim and I, who represent Musical Passions, are doing. And it is our pleasure to welcome Gregg August, who is the composer of a work that will be a world premiere. And we have also with us Yale Cinema Cohen, who is the violist of the group, who can help to tell us some of the wonderful things that are going on. So, Gregg, firstly, welcome. And my first question is, I understand you're based in Connecticut, but are you planning on coming in for the premiere?
Okay, no, I live in New York City.
Even worse.
Yeah, I can actually. Dan and I spoke about, well, we first, when he wanted a piece for clarinet, piano, and string quartet, we instantly removed the cello and put bass in there, thinking that one day maybe I could play. And but as it turns out, next week I'm actually unable to come and play because I have to play in Philly with something else that was kind of hard to pass up. But it was all sort of last minute getting this together with Dan and the group. And yeah, I hopefully will be able to play it with all of you sometime soon, and at least check out some of the rehearsals and, of course, the recording of the concert.
Okay, well, I can tell you that the bass part is in excellent hands with Tracy Rowell.
Oh, I know. Yes, we've had a lot of
artist.
Yes.
I want to focus this interview on you and the piece which you've entitled Recitations and Dedications for Clarinet, Piano, and Strings. And
yes.
This really is an interesting title. And Yale has been kind enough to forward me the introductions that you've sent to the musicians and copies of the poems that feature in two of the movements, which are very powerful. One dealing with basically Chinese incarcerations on Angel Island, which is San Francisco's Ellis Island, which held, according to your information, 175,000 Chinese immigrants, most of whom were eventually deported under the terrible Chinese Exclusion Act. Something that was mirrored in Australia with something called the White Australia Policy, a blot on the landscape that was finally removed in 1970. Anyway, the poems are very powerful. And that's the first movement, called Angel Island. And the second movement is called Testify, which is, in a sense, a musical testifying by the musicians, expressing their feelings through their instruments. And then in the third movement, you do a terribly moving poem dealing with the mother of Emmett Till, the Black teenager who was brutally murdered, and the mother's courage of allowing an open coffin to show the world what was done to her son, which led to huge protests and a resurgence of civil rights. So this is very powerful stuff. Where did the inspiration come for you from this kind of material?
Well, to be honest, I've been working on these themes since 2009. So I got a commission back then for a large scale jazz work. I play jazz and I play classical. I'm sort of in both worlds. And they gave us carte blanche as to what we could we could do with it. And 2009 was a pretty turbulent time with President Obama getting in, and there were a lot of things going on in the country that were very upsetting. A lot of the reactions to his getting elected, and what it really came down to was my participating as a musician, mostly in New York City, with people that look like everybody under the sun. I mean, we're all different. It's mixed. We have, of course, white people. We have black people. I play jazz and Cuban music with people of color, and classical music with, I'm just saying, it's like this mix of backgrounds. However, I was always very uncomfortable talking about race, especially with African Americans, my friends, my colleagues that I played with on, for years, when all this stuff was going on with, with the politics.
Mm-hmm.
It just sort of seemed we can't really talk about this stuff. Why? And then so I got on this thing about just trying to talk about it. That's why the record, or the piece and the record that came later on, was called Dialogues on Race. So I started investigating all these basically these poems and these themes of things that have gone on in America, and felt very frustrated that so much of this stuff, I mean, I wasn't a young guy. I was in my 40s when I was writing this, and that I didn't know these things. So it was self-frustration, but also frustration with our system and how they keep history sort of suppressed. The main theme in that record, again, it was about, the trying to find opportunities to speak with each other, just about, not trying to agree with each other, just trying to speak about it. That was where it was all coming from. And I found the poem about Emmett Till's mother, and I was, like you say, it's very powerful. And I ended up contacting a gentleman, a director that made a documentary about Emmett Till, like long ago, and he gave me footage of Mamie Till Mobley speaking about him, about what she saw in the casket, and I incorporated that into the record. So I keep saying the record, but then when Dan was asking me about maybe writing something, I said, man, this is consuming me and inspiring me, and I want to go with it. I want to make another record, but I want to investigate other areas of these frustrations and suppressions, so to speak, historical suppressions by U.S. the government. And so I had been reading about the Chinese Exclusion Act, and then I discovered the Angel Island part of it, and then found these. I mean, I know I'm getting off topic again, but I sort of just go.
No, this is fascinating background.
Right. Okay, good.
The question is then, how do you translate these feelings into a musical work? Are the poems going to be read by the musicians?
No. I mean, okay, so in the case of the first poem, the Angel Island poem, I discovered actually an audio recording of a gentleman reciting it, and it's powerful, and he's singing it. He's like improvising the melody, and I sort of took that and I kept playing with it, and I tried to adapt it for myself, not to make it literally what he was singing, but I couldn't help but escape the sort of one rhythmic thing he was doing, and then there's one intervallic thing he was doing. So I started there. That's the opening, not the opening when the clarinet plays his cadenza, but the melody, the theme that runs throughout the first section of the piece is that's where that comes from. And then the other thing I did was the actual poem that I chose. There are, I think, quite a few. I chose poem 43. I have a bass student at NYU who's from Shanghai, and she read it. She recorded herself reciting the poem, and it was incredibly, like, just solid, rhythmically, motivically. It was very cohesive, and that's the middle section. I don't know, that's the thing in 5/8 when the meters keep changing. Yeah, that's what that is. So I'm literally like, I transcribed even her inflections, her intonations as best I could, and then the rhythms, and I sort of went with those two ideas: the gentleman reciting the poem in song as an improvisation, first part of it, second part being the how my student interpreted it, and I basically just lifted it.
Okay, that's really great. Yale, you have some pressures on you and are going to have to leave in a moment or so. Let me ask you, as the representative of the musicians, what's it like to play Gregg's vision of these powerful poems in a strictly instrumental format? Since in the performance we won't be able to hear Gregg's very powerful explanation of the motivation for the pieces. So you're the musician, you've been practicing the work, and how does that come across?
So I would say you start practicing your notes. I mean, of course, I read Gregg's notes before the music, and that's very powerful. But to hear you speak about it, it's even way more. So I hope you can join us in one of the rehearsals to really explain that. Look at your music as a musician. You can imagine anything you want if you're not reading the notes, or just that's the beauty of playing new music, that you can really work with the composer and try to convey their message. So I look forward to work with you. What is very interesting in this whole program to me is that all the 4 composers are all amazing instrumentalists and composers and educator too. So they are multi-skilled, and that's fascinating, because we have Dan and Donna are going to play a piece by Amanda Harberg, who is a concert pianist. We're playing another piece by Stevenson, who is a trumpet player. And we're playing a piece for viola, clarinet, and piano by Kenji Bunch, who is an amazing violist. And also, so what fascinating, and you're an amazing bassist who does crossover jazz and, like you said, Latin, Cuban music. I love the fact that, as you said, we don't feel comfortable talking about race. Like, you are playing with this musician and we didn't talk about it. So the music is a way to express that and maybe to gather all of us.
What I find interesting is we've got the strings and the clarinet. What's the voice, in quotes, of the clarinet in these pieces?
I don't know if you are aware that Dan and I went to Juilliard together years ago. Dan he's a dear friend. And even though he left New York to go play in Cleveland, we've retained our friendship. I always found a special connection with Dan on a personal level as well as musical. But so when I was trying to figure out how I wanted to use the clarinet, it's really about Dan, his role. He starts out the piece, he has an opening cadenza at the very beginning of it. And he's the glue.
Very interesting to hear you say this, because there are instances in the history of music. Brahms wrote for a clarinetist that he really was crazy about, 2 of his finest chamber works, the clarinet quintet and then the sonatas, which are just melting. And what I'm hearing from you is that since Dan plays the clarinet, you're following in the footsteps of Brahms.
Well, I mean, you can't escape that piece, the Brahms quintet, when you're writing for clarinet. What I would also say, though, is Dan used to play saxophone. He played jazz. So when I met him, we met in Aspen. I think it was a jazz gig, like a party or something, and he was playing tenor. And so I had that in mind too, knowing that he was an abandoned jazz player. And the great thing about this project was it was for someone I knew. I've done that before for a bassoonist, a girl I played with at Orpheus. Yes,
she plays we know. We heard that.
Yeah, she sings. I mean, it was like, who does that, But that was also a very personal connection with her and with her abilities. And the fact that I could play helped, and her husband played piano. But this is maybe only the second time I've composed for a specific person, knowing the person and knowing they're playing. And so it's a great opportunity.
We're certainly looking forward to this piece. And I hope one of these days you can come and do a concert in Cleveland, and we'll get to hear.
Absolutely.
Everybody raves about your bass playing and what we've seen in the YouTube clips.
Thank you.
It leaves us with a lot of anticipation. So best of luck. Jim and I will be at that concert, and we'll be there to cheer you on. Thanks very much for doing this interview for the podcast, despite all the technical problems we had at the beginning. So
no problem.
Lots of luck in your career, and you'll certainly get feedback on how it went.
Thank you, Eric. We're going to end this podcast with a preview of that jazz piece that Gregg August talked about earlier in the interview, called Dialogues on Race. Longer sections of this work are also on YouTube, as is this. Dialogues on Race by Gregg August.
Was I going to have the casket opened? I said, oh yes, we're going to open the casket. We're going to open the casket. He said, well, I said, oh yes, you want me to open the casket? Do something for the face? Want me to try to fix it up? I said, no, people see what I see. But I want the world to see this. To see this.
I met Mamie in 1999, 2000, when we were working to try to abolish the death penalty in this country. And here's this woman who I'd heard about, read about, of course, but she was just like any of our mothers or grandmothers. I swear, this capacity to forgive, this capacity for justice,